This
we're able
conference will now be recorded.
hands-on stuff. You know, we've had to alter it somewhat, but COVID hasn't stopped us. It has slowed us down. You know, in the beginning, it did stop us, but we had to find a way to get around that and use best practices, same best practices we're using on the fire ground. So we're moving ahead.
So let's talk about 1403 candidly. You know, is 1403 the Training Officers Employment Act of 1986? Is it over the top? So Matt, if I ask you the question of, you know, it's putting us out of business, right? We've got to have so many people. We've got to have an instructor with every functional group. We've got to have a double IC. We got to have a safety officer. We have to rotate the ignition officer. Have we gotten to the point where 1403 has outlived its value?
Absolutely not. I can fully disagree with that statement, and that's probably one of the biggest statements out there. And one of my topics is, you know, 1403 isn't, you know, following 1403, we can't be real with what we're doing. What it has changed, obviously, is our objectives. We have clear objectives with what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish in those containers or engineered buildings, whatever it be. You know, what is the objective that we're inside? Are we truly trying to show modern fire behavior and throw people right in the middle of that? Absolutely not. We would be reckless in doing so. UL and FSRI have done that for us and are showing us those results, which we didn't have before. So, you know, you go back 20 years, we didn't have a lot of that information at our fingertips on the computer on the fire behavior part. But when you take those objectives, you know, take for example, you know, we have live fire, we create live fire inside these structures. Our objective is to stretch a hose line in a high heat, low visibility environment. That's realistic. And you can do that and you can get a lot of value out of that versus just stretching a hose line in a building with none of that. So defining clear objectives that put those firefighters, you know, in a stressful situation, but not in a situation that we used to. You know, that's what got me involved in 1403. Is the first class I took. Every one of the line of duty deaths that we went over inside there, the different injuries that happened on the fire ground, you know, in one way or another, our department had done those and just got lucky and got through that. So we've just got to, you know, redefine our objectives and what we're doing in these buildings. And so it's not slowing us down. It's actually giving us, you know, a more clear picture. We're just not freelancing, lighting a fire in a corner with mattresses and tires and entering and trying to put it out. You know, there's a lot more behind it. And see, we got Dan on the meeting today, and with all his help and information they're throwing out and UL is throwing out, you know, we got to get that piece out of the way using them and their platform, and then use tactics inside those buildings. So it has changed, but I don't think it slowed us down.
Hey Matt, so being somebody that's gone through this journey in your department, you know, from start to finish, what would be the best advice for an organization or a fire department that's about to go down this journey? What would you say would be some top ticket items that you would give them for advice?
Are you talking like somebody that is just looking at building a structure and starting a program, a live burn program?
Yes, sir.
Start with that standard on building structures and how they're built, how they're engineered. You know, we have a lot of CCANs out there, and we have that. We went the low budget route, but we didn't skip the engineer side of it and getting that stamp on it. So there's a lot of different ways, but explore that, you know, because there is a separate standard on how those structures are to be built and the safety factors in that. So do that. And clearly look over the 1403 standard and what's required to do these burns. You know, Kevin, you kind of hit it right on the head. He listed all these positions out that we have to have on the fire ground to conduct these burns. So, you know, look at that and see if you're able to support something like that, but don't let that scare you, that there are ways to, through your agency and your training and your instructor status and who you have for instructors to get around, and I don't say get around it, but to make sure your people are educated to fill those positions on the fire ground. You know, just become familiar with what 1403 is. We didn't. I mean, my first exposure to 1403 was when I entered the training office in 2013. And we had been burning since obviously 1996, since I came on. But so it was just completely different. So become familiar with it, but reach out to all your resources through ISFSI. We have tons. We have a minimum staffing drill that we do in the class just for that, you know, because we have departments that do have minimum staffing problems, and we have departments that have no issue with staffing when it comes to the training ground. So do your research there in what you're capable of burning, but you know, become very familiar with 1403. So, you know, we're not repeating history. 1403 started in 1986 for a reason, and we all know when NFPA standards are started, or off a tragedy that happened in Boulder, Colorado, and Boulder, Colorado was not the first. So,
and that all just dovetail on what you're saying. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think you make a great point. To follow up on what you said before, I absolutely disagree with, you know, what I was trying to bait you with, that 1403 has outlived its livelihood. It's actually the tool we have, the power now that we can, you know, proclaim that we're doing safe training. And what you said makes all the sense in the world. Start with the standards. So 1402, which is the building standard, tells you, you know, about the construction. Just because you have a fixed facility doesn't mean you're out of the woods. You should have, you know, inspections of that, both the AHJ inspections and the engineers inspections. You know, 1401 tells us about training records, what should be in a training record. You know, you have to have the, you know, the activities conducted, who the instructors were, the equipment used. All of that stuff is, you know, incredibly important. And then 1403 is the glue that ties that all together. So certainly for Seth's question of if your agency or your department is, you know, either rebuilding, building, or renting live fire training structures, you got to be a really informed consumer. Salespeople will tell you whatever you want to hear to make a sale, and you've got to be smarter than they are. And I don't mean that disparagingly. There's some incredible vendors out there, some incredible manufacturers. But when you purchase a structure, you know, our experience was we asked them, hey, you know, can you provide us a burn sequence matrix for this? And they said, a burn what? And so people that are selling us, you know, these tools to train with don't know the standards. So you have to, you know, ask the right questions. So we could, you know, we could dig down into that a little bit more. Or Seth, what's your pleasure? I know we're 10 minutes into this. Last thing I want to do is cite a bunch of standards. I would like to, you know, just get to the meat and talk about, you know, how we're using this standard to protect our most valuable asset, which is life.
Let's get to the meat, Kevin. Let's get to the meat.
So how do you do that? You know, you can have people argue all day long that we don't have enough people. We can't burn. We've got to, you know, let's just buy a magic fire panel and a smoke machine, you know, and then we don't need to staff all of these positions. So I'll throw that question out there. How can, for drop-in training, let's say incumbent training, Engine 35, you know, Medic 31 are going to come down to the training center today and do some drills. How can we streamline that so that we can get the drills done, do it safe, and allow them to have live fire training? And my short answer is, you know, standard evolutions. 1410 taught us how to look at our training and have those standard evolutions, but let's take it a step farther. Let's have standard evolutions set up for our burn camp or our burn building, so that when, you know, 35s calls and says, hey, we need to come down and burn with our rookie, we can say, okay, well, we're going to run training evolution 2, 3, and 4. That means that we're going to need to have 4 training officers. You know, you're going to need to staff these positions. So for us, that's the magic bullet, or the easy button, is having these things pre-scripted. I get it that the multi-company, the, think on your feet, follow the direction of command is kind of that gold standard, but these smaller standard evolutions really work for us for that incumbent training. Matt, I know you've cooperated with the airport. You probably have a little more notification to do when you do a training, so you probably have to have a little longer lead time. But that seems to be our biggest challenge, is just that, that cold phone call on a Thursday morning saying, hey, we're going to be down there at 11. I see there's an opening in the training schedule. BC asked us to give you a call. So Matt, how do you do it with the required, lead time with the tower and all of that?
Actually, we have a great relationship with them. It's just basically we notify our tower, and if they say yay or nay, I mean, it's just a day of situation. So that's really not the big problem. But we've tackled it the exact same way. We've come up, one big part of the class, if you take the 1403 credential, is obviously it's also in the standard, is you'll have a written plan. And with that plan, it's your burn plan, it's your training plan. We've created a library of those. In the beginning when we took the class, this is gonna take us a week to prepare for by putting this plan together. And we put different plans together based on different resources. If we only have so many people, you can do these objectives. This is the types of burns you can do. If you have more than that, you can ramp it up. But these pre-made burn plans, which will save your life if you were to have a catastrophic event on the fire ground, it's a document that documents what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it. Having that library ready for your instructors to, last minute, we want to drill up there, have all your resources up there, have your, whatever, if it's a Class A facility, have the materials up there, because we got to take advantage, the way we operate, we'll take advantage of free days if we have to. We do have organized burn days during the summer, but there's times when our company officers, one thing COVID did for us was get our company officers active. And now that they're active, they're wanting to do these drills with their guys and get together with other companies. So with the support of the training office, we're able to pull that off within a couple hours if they say, let's do it. And that's all based on having those pre-written plans. Something that's going to cover you, and also at the same time, clearly define your objectives. Going back to, why we have this standard, you can look at every one of the factors where there was a death or an injury. There wasn't a clearly defined objective in every single one of them. They went off course. So having those at your disposal, and there's plenty out there. If you don't have them, this is what this is all about. I'll share them with you. We have an entire library of different objectives that if you want to meet in a live fire environment.
Great, and we'll do that.
Sorry, Kevin, that's what I was just going to bring up is when we post this thread on isfsi.org with the recorded version, we're going to attach a couple of these examples from you and Kevin, if that's okay, so we can share it with the membership today.
You got it. How about this? How about the change in the standard? Instructor-in-Charge now is supposed to be Fire Instructor 2. How do you deal with that? Obviously we had some forewarning that was going to happen, but today in my department, we don't have enough Instructor 2s that also have the live fire instructor credential. So how, as an agency, how are you guys addressing that out there? Are you dealing with it in policy and saying, our default was, we said, well, in the life of this standard, we'll work towards that. We're making progress. We have a declared plan of how we're going to get there. Like with all NFPA standards, I believe that, having a plan for compliance isn't the same as complying, but at least it shows that you're not ignoring the standard and you're aware of it, because, like Lairdsville taught us, ignorance of the standard or ignorance of the standards doesn't excuse you from anything.
I think that comes, Kevin, I think that comes with a strong succession plan, right? And that's kind of the foundation of building your organization. We came out with that years ago, from the ground floor all the way up to the fire chief, of what that looks like as far as requirements, education requirements, certification requirements, and it's got to be what my chief always says is it's got to be attainable, right? You can't just throw darts out there and say, okay, we need everybody to be instructor 3. That's just not feasible. However, if they're going to be in charge of training, I think being instructor 2 is, or having the stamp of approval from their authority having jurisdiction, I think that's a real big piece of it. So I don't think it's unreasonable to ask. You just have to be building that out from the ground floor up, saying, if we're going to be in the training division that someday, then this is what you need to be aspiring to and working on. So
Good.
I agree with it's a big change, especially for small organizations like mine and small organizations that don't, volunteer organizations that don't have a training budget. But you gotta do the right thing on the front end also, I guess is my answer to that.
You bet. And then I think that brings up, we could do an hour and just talk about AHJ responsibilities. I mean, I think we all know what a safety officer is on our department as far as a burn safety officer or an instructor, but have we written it down? I think that's incredibly important. I mean, the standard requires annual inspection of our props and our facilities by the AHJ. If I asked you today, can you produce 10 years worth of records on your facility, on your inspections? Probably don't have the annuals. Hopefully you have the engineered inspections. But again, when I took the training job and looked in the file at the engineered inspections, we had a bunch of one-page letters saying, yeah, it's structurally sound. We engaged finally a structural engineer that had experience. He did core samples, he did spectrometry, he did all of this stuff, and realized that we had, a building that was ready to collapse. It cost us $30,000 in repairs, but we got a reasonable assessment, an accurate assessment of what we had. So I think that's another thing that we probably ought to include in the resources from this webinar. It's just the AHJ responsibilities, how you're dealing with all of those. Let's see, what else? Water supply. We all talk about water supply at the drill ground. We only need a single source, right? If we have redundant pumps and backup power. We all say that, but have we checked that out? Have we brought that back to ground and assured that those things are in place? And thank God, John Murphy is on the ISFSI board and a great friend, because if anything goes bad, that's all of our defaults. Call Murphy before the fire department does, because you've got to, John is a rock star, and he'll represent fire departments, and he'll represent individuals. But if something were to go wrong, your burn plan, your AHJ records, your training records, all those things are going to need to be produced, immediately. And certainly with computers and timestamps and everything else, if you produce it on the 5th and the accident occurred on the 3rd, you're going to look really foolish. So you've got to dot your I's and cross your T's. And I think that's the incredibly important thing about 1403 to me, is knowing the standard, knowing how to develop a rock solid burn plan and sticking to the plan. Like Matt said, all these injuries that we have, point back to not having an objective. I think another thing that it often points back to is somebody deviating from the plan. When you look at Rachel Wilson in Baltimore, you look at the things that occur where somebody is saying, hey, it's just not smoky enough. It's just not hot enough. Wouldn't it be cool if, but the instructor in charge has to be that designated adult. And when you're in charge, you got to take charge, and you've got to have a plan. You got to do an instructor briefing. You got to do a student briefing. You got to do a walkthrough, and you've got to stick to that plan. So I think I've talked plenty, but why don't I turn it over to Matt and some of the other things that you had brought up in your notes there. We can bat around, and then we could probably open it up for some questions to our esteemed group of attendees here.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll just keep going. I hit on it a little bit in the beginning, and one of the, as we enter any class, always ask the question, and even in my own department is, this isn't realistic fire. You know, I talked about earlier about having different types of objectives, but it's just not realistic fire. So how can we be teaching our people, you know, to go in and look for what they're looking for, the fire dynamics part of it. I think that is one of the best improvements in the 2018 standard. You see a lot of additional prerequisites on knowing fire dynamics. That's something that didn't exist in the standard before. And there is no shortage of training out there to learn fire dynamics, whether it's through the website, you know, UL's website, or it's through their online classes, or it's actually going and listening in person and seeing the results of all these studies and the amount of money that have been spent on these studies and learning the fire dynamics side of it, because that goes back to, you know, that's going to teach the student that part of it. And that's not what we're going to be using the facility for. You know, like I said, it would be reckless. And what I mean it would be reckless is, you know, let's say the C word, the cancer word. You know, why would we stick our individuals in those situations when they don't need to be there? And we don't need to do that. I think that the way that the classes, the online classes are put together, they're very clear and they're very understandable. And some of the small scale experiments that you do, small scale props, all those different things, we can show those fire dynamics. So understanding those before you even get in the container, you know, that's out of the way. And now we're going to use these containers for other, you know, whether it's search and rescue, you know, you're just doing it in that high heat, low visibility. You know, FSRI has also done studies on different types of burn buildings, different types of smoke, different types of fuels that you use inside them, fuel configurations, you know, get to know all that stuff and what they produce. It's going to help you meet your objective. So, you know, you do all that stuff on the front end and it's a win-win. You're going to learn fire dynamics on the front end, and then, you know, operating under pressure, under heat and smoke conditions inside the containers or the engineered facility or a Class B facility, whatever you have. You know, there's a lot of work that can be done on the front end, but putting our people in toxic environments, such as what we used to do, non-Class A combustibles, it's just, like I said, it's just plain reckless. We don't need to expose our people to anything more than what we already are on the job. So we've come a long ways in that category, and I think that's why that exists in there. And it also helps your instructors, you know, as you're looking through the 1403 standard, understanding, if your instructors understand fire dynamics, you know, some things, you know, I'm not saying that burning in a container or an engineered building can't get out of hand, but knowing those fire dynamics and what to look for and when to stop an evolution or slow down an evolution, you know, it's a big piece of it. And it made my day when I seen that in the new standard and all the additional factors there, and being able to recognize, you know, when conditions aren't good to have people inside. So
Matt,
as you know, something near and dear to my heart is this cancer prevention. And how are you guys dealing with live fire and Billings, or anybody on this call today? Is how are you guys dealing with the decon? How are you guys practicing what you preach? Are you really owning it? And what does that look like in your organization?
We are absolutely owning it. So we've taken the I think it's Philadelphia concept with the bucket to start with. We do gross decon on scene. What we do on the training ground is exactly what we do on the fire ground. Our people get to know that, you know, if we don't do it, I mean, smoke, even though we're not burning mattresses and tires, you know, it's still toxic and it's still dangerous to you if you don't decon. So, you know, we don't differentiate between, okay, this is a training event and this is an actual fire event. Treat it the exact same way. Gross decon in the beginning, and then we make sure that each company gets a full shower before they go back into service and staggered.
Yeah, it's interesting in my organization because we can't go out of service. You know, when we're on shift, we're at, you know, there's nobody coming in and backfilling us. So we really have to be meticulous about and thoughtful about that process, and, you know, making sure that we're taking care of each other and hustling through the decon and hustling through the shower system and making sure we're we're doing it right on the front end. It's a challenge, but I hear a lot of larger organizations around the country being like, well, they got to be out of service and this and that. Well, yes and no. You got to do what's feasible for your organization and for what your response profile is.
And I would just add that the more you can do that, like you do on the fire ground, whether it's rehab or whatever. And then hopefully Dan will talk to us a little bit. He's written on, the hazards of training fires, and, that old adage that it's just straw. It's actually, the carcinogens that are in that in many cases are worse than a lot of the other fire things. So there's just, what a resource to have both on this call and in this society. So, I would kick it to Dan and say, as far as training fires, you've done an incredible job of teaching us the hazards of training fires from that, EDLH, that eventually dangerous to life and health environment. So you got 2 seconds, Dan.
Yeah, so we certainly have made some headway in defining some different fuel packages and what the heat release rates of those are, so that instructors can look at it and have a idea of what amount of fuel do I need, given my compartment, given the ventilation. In cases when you're intentionally trying to have a flashover, is this something that'll do the trick for me? And the key problem with all the line of duty deaths, of course, has been, as you point out, lack of objectives and whatnot, and basically surprise. And an unanticipated or uncontrolled flashover occurred, and that put people in harm's way, damaged gear, damaged injured individuals. Some folks are using the safety net of thermocouples in their training towers as a way to manage risk. But on the 1403 committee and the 1402 committee, we find that most people, including some of the manufacturers, don't understand how a thermocouple works. And if a thermocouple can fail by having its insulation compromised, and if the thermocouple wires touch outside the fire compartment and inside the fire compartment, it doesn't give you an alarm. It doesn't give you a red flag warning that something's wrong. It's going to give you ambient temperature in the morning when you check the facility. When you turn on the box, it's going to read, yeah, it's 23 degrees, it's 70 degrees, whatever it is. And the problem is when you start the fire inside, you might have 1400 degrees at the ceiling, and it's going to average that with 70 degrees outside and tell you it's only 700 degrees in there. Or it could be 800 degrees the ceiling. It'll tell you it's only 400 degrees in there. And if the safety officer's watching that, there's been a number of cases where, people have come out of the burn room with their helmets on fire and getting their ears burned, getting their shoulders and arms burned. And, the safety officer's like, hey, it never got above our threshold of 700 degrees to be a warning to get people out of there or to put water on the fire. So, all this, the whole system, you got to take a systematic approach to it and certainly monitor that to understand what you have. It's just not enough to plug and play. The instructors really need to know why they're doing what they're doing, regardless of what component of that work is. And so that's a very important piece. I also wanted to share with the group that 1403 is open for comment right now through the end of the month, through June 30th. So if there are some things that you're thinking about or ISFSI is thinking about that they'd like changed or added to, there's still an opportunity to do that. I'll give you a scare, maybe. I don't know, it scared me. We were doing some smoke explosion experiments last November and December with Charlie Fleshman from New Zealand. And basically we were building 4-foot long, 30-inch by 30-inch plywood boxes, and we were putting pine cribs in them. So one would think I've got a wood-based fire and it's pretty clean. And to look at it, the smoke was light gray. It wasn't heavy black smoke. we did accomplish our mission of getting some smoke explosions. And we also noticed that we were trashing our gas concentration measurement equipment. So normally when we run a burn where we use furniture, we have a 5-micron filter, a 2-micron filter, and then a small HEPA filter just before the meter to protect the meter from getting particulate contaminants in it. And as you know, if you have particulate less than 10 micron, and for some reason you're exposed to that without your SCBA, that can go to deep lung penetration and be a very harmful exposure for anyone involved. So we're underventilating this wood and burning it, and it doesn't look bad. But then we notice that our entire sampling train is getting contaminated. So what it tells us is we're generating nanoparticles. So when we burn a piece of polyurethane foam and we see that soot, it's big, it's visible, and we know it's a bad actor. And basically that 5-micron filter we have in our sampling line takes most of that away. Nanoparticulates are going through everything. And that's why the smoke doesn't look bad, because we can't see it. It's too small to see, and yet that can be the most hazardous environment. So in terms of protecting your folks when they're mopping up or thinking they just have this friendly, light gray smoke going on, people got to be on air all the time. It's really important. And the other concern is that this stuff will penetrate your gear further, where the big chunky stuff from the synthetics will stick on the outside of the gear. So you need to have a soapy water and a brush to get it off, but at least it's trapped there. It's not going any further. These nanoparticles, to be determined. So we're hoping to start a new project on that in the near future to better understand chemical exposures from different kinds of fuel loads that people are using. Gavin Horn and Kenny Fent from NIOSH put out a paper, I guess was published maybe 6 months ago, looking at oriented strand board. And a number of fire departments thought that they found a cleaner burning oriented strand board because it was advertised as being formaldehyde free. So they were spending extra money to buy this formaldehyde free oriented strand board. So there we got to look at what makes it formaldehyde free. Well, it's formaldehyde free for a regular consumer. So what they were actually doing was trying to change the chemistry of their glue, and then they were using a polyurethane sealer to basically seal whatever formaldehyde was in there, because there's still formaldehyde in natural wood, seal it in. And the way they test it is they put it in an environmental chamber at 70 degrees, 50% relative humidity, and they monitor what it off gases for like 96 hours. So if it barely off gases, so much that if it was in your house, put on the walls or on the floor, the consumer wouldn't be exposed to any significant off-gassing. So what happens when the fire department buys that and then sets it on fire? Well, here's a material that might have off-gassed some of that formaldehyde while it was sitting in the lumber yard, while it was traveling on the truck to the training academy, while it was sitting around before it got burned. Well, now because they bought the formaldehyde-free one, it's not off-gassing anything until they light it on fire. And so the findings were that it was discharging and emitting significantly higher amounts of formaldehyde than the cheap formaldehyde that was not advertised as formaldehyde-free. So we're not living in a simple society. If you're making decisions, you could be making decisions with the best of intentions, but the reality is anybody that was exposed to those fires got exposed to a higher dosage than they needed to be. Is it enough to cause a problem? We don't know. Is it worse than the other? Is it more than the other one? Yeah, we know that. So you just got to be careful before you make a decision for your department. Say, hey, I read an article about this. Make sure it's applicable to your situation before you engage, is I guess the short answer.
Thank you, Dan. We didn't get to talk about acquired structures. I don't think we've got time to delve into that, but again, I think that's an important, and maybe for a future, to talk about acquired structures. Again, some of the most valuable training we can do. It's expensive, it's time consuming, but it's absolutely worth it so long as you do it correctly. At ISFSI, we teach both the fixed facility and acquired structure class. We teach how to do it right. I couldn't be prouder of our group of instructors in our curriculum. So with that, unless Matt or Seth, you have something else, do you want to open it up for some questions?
Yeah, some questions would be great. If you guys want to either raise your hand or chime right in if you got questions. We got a lot of talent on this call, so it's a good time to fire away. Yes, sir. You're still in, there you go.
All right, yeah, there I am. So not so much of a question, just sort of comments. First, I want to give a plug to the ISFSI. They came to Boston and did their live fire fixed facility course, and the people who took it, I wasn't there, I was in charge of training, but didn't attend the course, thought it was excellent. We did it because we've been doing live fire for quite a long time, and my predecessor in training realized that there is a standard out there, and maybe we should check on what we're doing and see if it actually applies. They didn't go to the class, but they came up with, based on the standard, a burn procedure, a burn check sheet and documentation that we do for every burn. And I wanted to go further and see if our guys, our instructors, could kind of get qualified into to see if we were on track with what was going on. And it seemed that we were. We're actually doing fairly well in adhering to the standard. When you mentioned the new one instructor too, I understand credentialing and I agree with it, in principle, but in theory, but in practice it's a little tough. And we make we request that our instructors go through at least instructor one. But I sat in on some of the testing, and it seemed to me it was more, could you plug in something to a computer and actually deliver a lesson plan and point where the bathrooms are in a certain amount of time, rather than could you actually instruct students, especially in something as risky as live fire attack. So just piling on more of those, I don't necessarily know is the answer. I think for us in our organization, we're lucky. We're a fairly big department, and we have a large pool of personnel to draw from. But I think it's very important to spend a lot of time on instructor development. The guys you want delivering that instruction have to be really dialed into not only fire dynamics, but methods of instruction, safety standards, and all the rest that would come into that standard. And I was surprised that you have kind of like someone call and just say, hey, we want to do a live burn today. I mean, that would be unheard of in our department. We do the larger group live burns when we're not training the recruits, and we spend a couple of months putting together that one particular lesson plan for a district, or most places would be a battalion's worth of companies to come down. And your point of an objective is that really resonated. Some guys ask me, they'll say, hey, how come we can't just, you light it on fire and we show up and we don't know what's going on, we just have to go to work. And I sort of smile and say, well, there's all kinds of things wrong with that. Starting with it, it's against the standard. You got to go through a walkthrough and you have to objectives, but I laugh sometimes because they have a briefing in which we go over fairly detailed, okay, you're a company, you're the third in, you're going to take this line to this floor. We don't tell them, where the fire is going to be or where the victims, if there are any. But more than once I've seen, they've just had a briefing, they get geared up, they start the evolution, and then that engine where we said, okay, this is what your assignment's going to be. Any questions? Everybody's, no, we're good to go. And in one evolution it was, you're going to grab a 2.5-inch line, your backup, this is the situation. And they get off and they stretch 1 3/4. And the lead instructor, the drill master, the top of his head came off, and he said, big line, and they dropped it. But they were just told 15 minutes ago, so what did we expect would happen if we just said, oh yeah, the building's on fire, go to town? Which is unfortunately what happens in the field. I mean, that's our reality. We show up and have no idea what's going on. So you've got that conflict between, hey, we want our live fire training to be realistic, not scripted, because that's not what we do in the real world, versus the safety and the standards we have to adhere to when we do live fire training. So it's, what's the intent of the lesson when troops that are not recruits go into a burn building? Is it stretching the line? Is it application of water? Is it door control? Was it all those rolled together, or are you just trying to get them exposed because maybe it's not a busy company or a busy district or a department, and you just want them to have, because they don't have fires very often, just live fire experience? You have to be very specific on what your lesson objective is and tailor it to that. So I just, just a few thoughts, that's all.
Yeah, great points. I think, as Matt says, having the objective, that is core to what you're training on. And I hadn't thought of the way you presented that before, but Fire Instructor 2 is doing test item analysis, able to develop lessons, all of that. So how does that exactly crosswalk to being a live fire instructor? I get that they're more experienced, but I think you bring up a great point. So nicely done.
All right, anybody else? Matt, you got any closing comments there?
Yeah, just a little more on that. And Dan, I guess you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the intent of the Fire Instructor 2, that's very difficult for us as well, but it's developing a plan part. It's the instructor part and developing a plan and how you're going to carry out that training would be the intent of, having the instructor in charge, having that qualification. Again, it can be through the AHJ document that they've had that training, but being an effective trainer and knowing how to build those plans, those are key. And if you're an instructor in charge, take charge. Don't allow freelancing. Don't allow things to get away from your objective. That's where things go south. But all good stuff.
Well, thanks, Kevin and Matt. I really, really appreciate your time today and bringing your expertise to this venue here. And Dan, thanks for chiming in and helping us out and steer the conversation a little bit. We're keep on plugging away. Jason, is he still on the call there? So our schedule is switching next month. Pete, you got something to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm trying to type and talk at the same time. Bad idea. Dan pointed out that the comment period is open for the standard, right? And we discussed a very, very relevant, very important point, is that it's great to have to raise the credentialing for the instructor too. That's a great idea, but it might not be meeting the actual need. All right. So that let's put our money where our mouths are. Everybody send in a comment, right? That, a thoughtful, it's not, this is bullshit. No, it's a thoughtful comment that says we understand the objective, what we're trying to accomplish here. Is this the best way to get to it? Or is there another way to do this? Could we have a instructor 2 or demonstrated competency in developing a lesson plan or whatever? So that departments that are working toward compliance have a better way of establishing that they're trying to meet that. We're not putting people between a rock and a hard place, right? And we're not just layering on credentials to make it look like we're requiring it. That automatically makes it better. So I don't want to belabor it, but we've got an opportunity here. Those of you that and really all of us that have a considered opinion about this should make sure that gets into the comment period on the standard. That is all.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. Well, with that, thanks again, everybody, for being here. And I can't remember what the schedule is for next month. I think it's the second and the fourth Wednesday. Is that correct, Pete?
First and third.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
50 shot at it. So,
so it'll be business as usual at next week, and then we're shifting to first and third Wednesdays, same time, same location. Yep.
Okay. Well, with that, thanks everybody, and be safe out there, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for